Thank you, Arctic Acoustic. I love the music. And welcome back to Hanging with History. This is Season 1, That Miracle That Happened, That One Time. And we're on Episode 30, The Elizabethan Age Part 2, Francis Drake, Sea Dogs and Witches. And Quokka's going to join us on the podcast.
Pirates and witches! I wouldn't miss it!
Quokka is a frequent guest and provides our Southern Hemisphere perspective, in addition to being a wonderful human being, hobbit, and social monkey. Okay, a little intro stuff first, and then we'll get into it. The Elizabethan era is one where we begin to see, blurrily, like through fogged glass, a lot of the outlines of the Britain that is to come. Partly it is because we have so much more data. There's little to hint at of the greatness to come. Not even 3 million people, with 1 million suffering from underemployment, a second-rate power, not exactly a minnow among whales, but Elizabeth's entire tax revenue is less than what France takes in from the salt tax, the gabelle, alone. But there are a few glimmerings that we can recognize. The incredible enterprise of Elizabeth's sea dogs is one, and when someone like Drake can go out and accomplish wonders, there's a hint at what's coming. I spent the morning with my Riverside Shakespeare, taking notes on how broader themes in the plays reflect Elizabethan concerns. Of course, it brings back memories. There's an appreciation of the entire human there, the virtues and frailties and ridiculousness alike. We can practically see the Hobbit sometimes. Simultaneously, Francis Bacon was thinking out the project that would become the scientific method. My basic assertion that this required the end of medieval superstition, the end of belief in magic, which was the core of the medieval church. Well, McCullough says that the medieval church had twin pillars. The invention of purgatory, along with the magic that moved the dead through purgatory, through the ceremony of the Mass, was one, and the papacy as a unifying international force was the other. The papacy pillar was pulled down first, but that was a lot less important for us than the sweeping away of the belief in magic so that science could progress. And there were really solid social achievements. We've alluded to witch burning, and there is more fictional witch burning in England than there ever was in history. Less witch burning seems like a really good thing. Christina Larner refers to English witch burning as merely a ripple compared to the continent's great waves of it. When you combine it with my whole minimally murdery conception of religious reform, you see something hopeful. But is it really explanatory?
You mean explaining the miracle? The Industrial Revolution? People killing over abstractions or killing less over abstractions. Somehow this is helpful. I mean, it seems reasonable, but what's the connection?
Before we try to answer that, this is a great age of witch burning on the continent. This is also a great time for the Spanish Inquisition.
I didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition.
One important thing about witch burning in Britain, we're doing about 5 a year, despite increasingly severe penalties, recall. It was much more about individual witches behaving badly than huge groups of women in league with the devil to destroy the world as it was on the continent. And why was that? Did English witches lack ambition? Had the devil been embarrassed in Britain so often that he stopped showing his face there? Forgive me a little digression. There is a story out of Wales about a woman who lost a sheep. She found it again, but separated from her by a raging river she daren't cross. So the devil comes along and offers to build a bridge over the river. But there is a catch, of course. He will take the soul of the first creature to cross the bridge. The woman agrees, and comes back early the next morning to see a proud Lucifer standing beside his brand-new bridge. She takes a deep breath and prepares to cross the bridge to reclaim her flock, and pulls a cat out from under her cloak and shoos it across the bridge. The devil was so embarrassed that he never showed his face in Wales again. I don't know why that tickles me. Norway has a version of this story too, but this one has a woman and a woman with a cat defeating the devil rather than working with the devil, and the cat is the devil's proximate cause of defeat rather than a witch's demonic familiar.
Well, I like that the devil can be so easily beat.
Witches, you can't torture subjects in England. With a few short exceptions, torture was not legal, and it was never legal for women. While on the continent, they could torture away. Have at it. Hence all the fantastic conspiracies uncovered by witch hunters there. The leagues with the devil that torturers could uncover were only limited by the imaginations of the torturers. I hope that's obvious for everyone. But back to explanatory power. We are not obsessively torturing each other or killing each other over our beliefs. Your twisted fantasies about the devil don't mean you get to burn anyone. Oh, the Inquisition. There's a lot we don't know about private religious beliefs and attitudes to society in Elizabethan England that we do know about in Spain. One reason is that Elizabethan England didn't make windows into men's souls, unlike the Inquisition, where we can learn a lot about skepticism and heterodox views, surprising given how closely people were regulated in Spain. But does all this have explanatory power? I've said before that social justice is the most powerful social technology ever known. I repeat this now with a more immediate consciousness of its failure modes than usual. I've repeatedly mentioned the better social relations that came from the end of serfdom, the better class of elites that you get from commerce and industry compared to serfdom, feudal domination, and university training. Law functioning without superstition is a consequence. In the Elizabethan era, we still get one law for the gentry and above and one for the poor, but matters of degree are important. Again, does this have explanatory power? Obviously, I think so, or I wouldn't be building it up this way, episode after episode. There's a theory out there that says tolerance for people on the autistic spectrum is responsible for all human progress in science. I'm just noticing that. Picking it up and inspecting it is beyond my competence. What will happen is that a number of relatively humble men will make many of the great and little steps in the miracle, and we will know their names, just as many did in the agricultural revolution, even if we seldom know their names.
You promised pirates, but you're just going on and on about why it's important to be nice.
Yeah, this is a tough one for historians. You can see Vikings like the sons of Ragnar, Rolfgangar, Thorkel the Tall, the two Olavs, and Forkbeard, and just say, well, there was something special about them and their followers. They were better than their enemies in some way we can only speculate about. It was over 1,000 years ago, so we can focus on the what of what happened, and that's challenging enough without worrying about the why. We hand-wave a few things like climate change and sea power and move on, pretending to take our poor-quality written sources seriously. The Elizabethan pirates had some pretty amazing successes as well, accomplishments and acts of heroism that are difficult for us to explain. But we have tons of written sources. Many of the people involved actually speak for themselves. We have a lot written directly by Drake. It is still very much tied into our Dutch history, what sometimes seems to be as much Spanish history as British. Episodes 13 to 16 were my attempt to provide a high-level overview before getting into the Reformation and the Elizabethan period the way we're doing it now. If we can remember concepts from episode 15, many of the sea dogs considered themselves part of an elect. If we can remember that others who considered themselves elect, the Dutch, could defeat Spain when Spain was defeating everyone else, like the Ottomans and France and the Germans. If we can remember God seemed to intervene directly and obviously to defeat the Armadas. Many British people at the time believed God was on their side, sincerely. So we're going to have to draw a line from the sea dogs to the stability of the Elizabethan religious settlement via God's intervention in human affairs. It'll take a few episodes. To the inward turn of the more radically religious in England and Scotland, who I guess we're going to call the Puritans, as it is more the past than Presbyterians, and the subsequent Laudian turn of the British episcopacy, which led directly to the English Civil War, the Republican period, the legislation and activity that led to British maritime and financial supremacy, consequent world leadership, the birth of America, and the miracle we've been building up to. This line from the pirates to the miracle is all kind of on the side of history as great movements. One force, one idea leading to another in the Hegelian process I promised outdoorsmen we would not get too far into. And we won't.
That's a relief.
This pretends there are no great men and women of history. However, we're going to fill the podcast with great men and women, and terrible ones too, because they also matter. In that sense, I have decided that P does equal NP. Paradox and contradiction are real. Smart people commit stupidity all the time, and that great forces and individual decisions drive history, got us to where we are now, living off the fruits of a miracle that protects and shelters us, despite the massive incompetence we sometimes sense around us. We will leave out a lot. The miracle lens will be the guide, and just so you know, this is the part I worry most about in presenting the podcast. Relatively unconventional things, like laying out the core approach of the podcast in the middle of episode 30, worry me less. Let's start with Sir Francis Drake. We'll bring in Hawkins, Raleigh, Grenville, and Newport as well. Drake, you will recall, treated Fox's Book of Martyrs as literal truth. He was a true believer in the elect nation and used to very much enjoy reading passages to his Spanish prisoners.
That must have been like reading Vogan poetry at them.
You already know him from the Armada episode, and before you started listening to Hanging with History, you probably already knew that he led the second circumnavigation of the world and got as far north as California, and we named Drake's Bay after him, as well as a cool hotel in San Francisco. When he was just 32 years old, he led 2 small ships to attack one of the world's richest prizes. It wasn't a ship, it was a gold and silver convoy that traveled overland from the Pacific to the Atlantic side of Panama. It was the way gold and silver mined in Peru and Potosí were shipped to Spain. This seemingly insane plan succeeded because Drake was able to make a local alliance with the Cimarron community living near the transshipment port of Nombre de Dios with some French Huguenot pirates who just happened to be around at the time. The Cimarrones are really interesting. They were escaped African slaves who formed a substantial community of maybe as many as 3,000 people, living quite close to this vital Spanish lifeline. Drake shipped out with about 130 men, which was pretty likely reduced by tropical disease at this time. So these allies were vital. The Cimarrones knew the trails, spied out Spanish movements, picked the best spot for an ambush. Together they eventually took one of the Spanish treasure trains, mule trains, with hundreds of pounds of gold and tons of silver. Drake had to share the gold with the French, but the Cimarrones weren't really interested in either silver or gold. Very practically, their interest was iron, and Drake gave them quantities as huge as he could give them. There were communities of escaped slaves all over South and Central America and the Caribbean, with the English usually referring to them as Maroons. The communities in Jamaica have been the focus of a lot of scholarship.
Well, then what happened to the silver? You said there was tons of it.
Many, many tons. Too much to carry off. They ended up burying it. Tons of silver. There's your legend of buried treasure right there. The Spanish eventually recovered it, so it wasn't a huge strategic blow by itself. But the fact was, a few desperate men had taken the Spanish treasure train. To add romance to the whole thing, Drake became the first Englishman to see the Pacific Ocean from the mountains in Panama. He returned safely to a hero's welcome and, in 1577, set off on another expedition, this time to attack the Spanish treasure from Peru in the Pacific, a sea upon which no English ship had ever sailed. This was probably at Hatton's instigation, approved by Elizabeth over Cecil's opposition because England and Spain were technically at peace. And here we begin to see glimmerings of long-term grand strategy that Hawkins was scribbling at, which we will go back to, but shouldn't lean on too heavily, because there was also just plain avarice, lust for money. The total government revenue was around £250,000 a year, and these pirate voyages brought in a reasonable fraction of that in one throw. So, we go back to strategy, we go back to money, and we go back to piracy versus privateering, but first, we go around the world. Drake started off with a real expedition. Not so ragtag as last time, almost 200 men in 5 ships, and in the Canaries they picked up 6 prizes. One was an upgrade, so they took it along. Typically, English pirates would sail south to the Atlantic islands, the Canaries, the Cape Verdes, the Azores, even on their way to North America because the trade winds made for an easier journey, and there they would get provisions by raid or trade and hope to take a Spanish or Portuguese prize, because ships from the Spanish Main and Brazil were usually stopping there as well. And sure enough, off Cape Verde, they took a Spanish merchant ship loaded with wine. They headed south for Patagonia, which they reached by June, and they decided to stay there for the winter before any risky attempt of the Straits. Remember, winter is our summer on the other side of the equator.
I never forget that.
Well, we Northern Hemisphere types forget that all the time. There they burned 2 ships to consolidate crews, which were reduced due to disease. There, tensions between the gentlemen explorers and the crew got pretty explosive. One of the gentlemen was accused of witchcraft by Drake and put on trial. He was convicted, but on the charge of mutiny. Apparently there was inadequate proof of witchcraft. In August, the little 3-ship fleet attempted the Straits of Magellan. One of the ships went down with all hands, never to be seen again. Another was so battered the crew demanded to return home, and so they left. So it was just the Golden Hind, one ship, maybe 80 men, that made it through alive. Remember episode 1, I quoted the saying that below 40 degrees there is no law, and below 50 degrees there is no God. And they ended up as far as 55 degrees south. At Tierra del Fuego, they solved the scurvy problem by taking the bark of a tree and boiling it in wine. And this was before they came up with the idea of lemon juice as a cure for scurvy, so it was a major issue usually, but not on this trip.
You mean lime juice?
No, it was lemon juice, not lime juice. Lemon juice has 10 times the vitamin C of lime juice, but back in the day, they called lemons limes. Confusing?
Yeah.
Not as confused as some of the early Antarctic explorers like Shackelford were when they contracted scurvy despite sucking down lime juice. Anyway, now they were in the Pacific and it was money time. They sailed north to Valparaiso and attacked it. The Spanish had never been challenged in the Pacific before and were totally unprepared. Lightly touching on grand strategy, Drake had just greatly increased the number of places for which the Spanish had to devote resources to defense. This raid was a major success, with lots of gold and silver captured, and another full shipload of wine for the comfort of the crew. Then they sailed into Callao, apologies for the pronunciation, which is the port city for Lima, and there were 12 ships there, which Drake plundered and then ran aground. By now, the Spanish are going crazy with fury. The governor in Lima is sending out soldiers and ships. A couple of ships caught up with Drake pretty fast, but suddenly discovered they weren't ballasted properly. So they returned home. I don't know if this is like episode 5, where the Frankish fleets of Louis the Pious would sail east if the Vikings were spotted in the west, but I wonder. This sort of thing will happen a lot. A large fleet of 13 ships was scraped together to chase Drake, of which Drake was totally unaware. He had got news that a treasure ship full of silver was going to head for Manila, so that's what he was looking for. The Spanish figured he would head for Panama, so that's where they hunted him. Blissfully unaware of the danger behind, Drake took another ship that by luck was carrying gold, 50,000 ducats worth.
But how much is 50,000 ducats worth today?
Well, close to 20,000 pounds at the time. What people often do is basically try to figure out how many ounces of gold and multiply by today's prices. But that seriously undervalues the gold in the 16th century. For one thing, gold has lost a lot of value since then, relative to everything else. For another, it isn't simply a matter of price or even factoring inflation. There was relatively little spare cash around in those days compared to now, so the purchasing power of gold, expressed in terms of something solid like land or labor, was enormous. So it's very hard for us to get our heads around. If you think of it as a sizable fraction of the annual government's tax income, you're getting there. Back to Drake. He caught up with the treasure ship that he had in mind, the Quokka, and it surrendered pretty quickly. The Spanish were just totally surprised to find an English ship in the Pacific, and aren't we at peace anyway? There were so many tons of silver that it took 6 days to transfer the treasure. There was so much silver that they had to replace the ballast, which is usually rocks, with silver bars. They were too full of silver for safety, but luckily they quickly captured a Spanish frigate, and they split their guns and silver between the two ships.
But a frigate is a powerful warship.
Well, in a couple hundred years we could speak of 20-gun frigates like the Surprise, or 44-gun frigates like the Constitution. But then, at the time, they would just mean any fast ship. It had a cargo of sarsaparilla, if I recall.
What did they do with the cargo of sarsaparilla?
Dump it in the sea. Then they got lucky. Yeah, I mean, this whole thing was a run of good luck. But they captured a small boat that had sea charts of the route to Manila and 2 Chinese pilots who knew the sailing route to Asia. And then they raided 3 more coastal settlements where they picked up a lot more silver, but also a huge supply of water casks and provisions, just in time. And Drake was already a believer in divine providence, coloring in the woodcuts in Fox's Book of Martyrs, as I've mentioned before. Anyway, Drake sailed north. The pursuing Spanish fleets completely failed to find him again, and we think he got maybe as far north as Oregon, about 48 degrees north. That's dangerous sailing territory. A map of 19th century shipwrecks off the North Pacific is pretty thickly dotted. It's all one great lee shore. He went south to where we think is Drake's Bay off the Marin coast near modern San Francisco. There they needed to careen the ships, which means scrape off the barnacles and algae and all the gunk before trying the Pacific. He named the place Nova Albion and claimed it for Elizabeth, and England would base all their future claims to the Pacific Northwest on this. And they would indeed be a player in the game of North Pacific power politics. One of my professors, Walter McDougall, has literally written the book on that subject. Drake had some tough choices to make. Were they ready for this insanely long voyage across half the world? They decided to leave the Spanish frigate behind and sail heavily loaded with silver in the Golden Hind. They got lucky again and reached the Caroline Islands in less than 3 months. But they had to pass up a possibly tasty Portuguese prize as it moved into shallow waters, and they were afraid to leave deep water with their heavily laden ship. Also, let's say it, strategically, Drake had already won. The Spanish now had to have defenses in the Pacific, and they lost a treasure ship. So surviving to return home would be nice for Drake, but victory was already achieved. Drake reached the Spice Islands, the Moluccas, and stopped at Ternate to trade with the local sultan. He traded silver for 10 tons of spices, a great deal. Near Celebes they ran aground, which isn't too surprising, but one of the preachers, who was still nursing a grudge over the execution of his friend the witch, preached against Drake. Drake had the preacher chained to a hatch and then excommunicated the preacher. I love this touch. It feels very early Protestant.
But he totally failed to find Australia.
Well, it's a big world, and to be fair, he wasn't looking for it or anything. When was Australia discovered again?
Well, the first documented landing on Australia was by a Dutch explorer in 1606, William Janssen, which was followed by a few more Dutch and then William Dampier in 1699, who was the first Englishman. Everyone thinks James Cook discovered it first, but they're wrong. Still, his expedition in 1770 was extremely significant because it led to the British returning in 1788 to colonize Australia.
Eventually they reached the Cape of Good Hope, June 1580 by now, so it's winter again and there are storms. But no, actually, they had great weather and good winds and all kinds of good luck, stopping and getting provisions. They sailed something like 10,000 miles with the loss of only one man during that piece of the return journey. They even saw elephants. Gray as a mouse, big as a house, old Oliphant am I, and I never lie. And when they returned home with just 60 men, they were heroes and extremely rich, splitting 24,000 pounds in addition to whatever gold and jewels they stole. Oh, that light portable treasure? No, I never saw it. I don't know what you're talking about. In any case, the investors got a 5,000% return on their investment. Elizabeth the Crown got a doubling of the annual government revenue as their cut, some say even more. And the whole thing was of enormous value to morale and overseas propaganda. It led to a deterioration of the relationship between Spain and Portugal. It forced the Spanish to create new defenses. Remember, they are already stretched, going bankrupt every few years. Episode 14 covers what a problem this was for the Spanish fighting the Dutch. And, if we need another reminder of how difficult it is to keep the 16th century context in mind, during this whole time, England was not at war with Spain. This didn't immediately lead to war with Spain. Somehow, this was okay. Elizabeth got the French to make a gesture approving Drake's voyage by having the French ambassador give Drake his knighthood. The Spanish did put a price on Drake's head, but that was it. So we covered 1 pirate, 2 pirate journeys, and we'll do more next week. I'm trying to conjure a picture in your mind of daring do and the origins of British sea power. But more than that, the English self-conception. And really, how different is all this from the Viking arc? More next time after Conversations with Camie. Hey, and thanks, Quokka. Thanks for coming on the program.
Okay, we'll figure it out.
So, Camie, we just listened to episode 30. It's a nice round number. And Quokka's back, this time with her favorite Vikings, although I guess we should call them pirates. You're shaking your head.
You stole my thunder.
Oh, no.
Oh, you're not going to. I was gonna just say that Drake was just a Viking of sorts. That I was gonna adopt that line, and you did it at the end. You did it again just now. So I guess at least I heard the obvious.
Oh, well, that's really cool that you came to that conclusion yourself. And you'll see in the next couple episodes, I'm going to develop that theme even more.
Drake, I was gonna say a modern Viking of sorts via his trade or raid all over the world, and so yeah,
That's great.
You stole my thunder.
That's great.
You got me. They were taking a lot of risk, but that's quite the return. His voyage was much more successful than I would imagine he even dreamed it would be.
Oh, yeah.
So you mentioned he read passages to his prisoners.
From Fox's Book of Martyrs.
Yeah, so was he trying to teach? Is he trying to convert? Is he just into it so much he likes to be a showman?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think he's trying to convince the Spanish that his point of view is right and they're wrong and they're condemned to hell. And
I'm picturing, him going down into the prisoners, or maybe it was on deck at that point, and just pulling out his book and...
Yeah, I love that image
I don't
too.
know, just almost preaching, maybe. He must have been very charismatic, and I can kind of picture maybe a showman reading.
He would have been enjoying himself a great deal.
Got this captive audience, too.
They were his prisoners.
I liked that Quokka put in a bit of Australian history there, keep us all in perspective and remind us of the opposite seasons there.
Yeah,
it's always good to hear. Always good to hear from Quokka and see her talents emerging. And like Quokka, I really enjoyed the story out of Wales where the woman makes the bargain with the devil regarding the first soul to cross the bridge. Brought into mind an old song from the States, Devil Went Down to Georgia. He's looking for a soul to steal. It was fun that Quokka and I both picked up on that story.
Yeah, I mean, the massive witch burnings and the conspiracies and the tortures that were going on all over Germany. We saw some sites where they'll have this plaque. You just walk into this little town. Well, here they burned 8 women to death, in the state time. It's like, But, they didn't do very much in England. There were a couple of parishes that where it was really concentrated. 80% of the action was going on in terms of witchcraft prosecution. So it's just probably some nut job with more power than he should have had, persecuting witches just because he could.
Maybe a form of control over people.
And thank you for the kind words and comments. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening.